This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
It's 9 p.m. in East Africa, and this is Global Business coming to you live from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome to the show. As always, we begin with a look at the markets. The JSE closed in negative territory for a fourth consecutive week today, as global growth concerns push investors to perceive safe havens such as gold and the dollar. The oil share was down almost 3% for the week, cutting its 2019 gains to just 2.16%. On Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed into law the controversial National Credit Amendment Bill, which aims to provide relief for heavily indebted consumers who earn less than 7,500 rand a month, slightly under $500. Banking and retail stocks ended lower, with analysts saying the bill could have an effect on their business. Coming up on the show tonight. Zimbabwe announces plans to settle its mounting debts. The trial of ousted Sudanese leader Omar al Bashir set to take off in Khartoum. And tension over Strait of Hormuz destabilizes crude prices and insurance premiums. Let's begin in South Sudan. Overhauling the country's trading relationships and taxation agreements with its East African neighbors is proving to be a complicated issue. For one non-profit organization, Trademark East Africa, it's the only way to ensure that revenues are spent on promoting peace across the country while boosting trade and investment. The outfit has now signed a memorandum of understanding with South Sudan's Revenue Authority, which should link it up to its East African counterparts. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
The idea is to get goods moving faster, especially across South Sudan's border with Uganda. Traders complain about unnecessary delays to getting their goods cleared across the border. So Trademark East Africa is hoping a new agreement will help boost business and speed things up. Trademark East Africa is also aiming to introduce an electronic cargo tracking system. This should help with getting humanitarian and relief aid into South Sudan across the border much faster. But the organization says the government also needs to do its part.
We all want to see a robust government of national unity emerge in November. And I can't stress more how important that is for institutions like mine to do more. And I think that it's not just our institution, it's the development community and the international development community. So let's get it right and let's move the country forward in a good way.
South Sudan's Revenue Authority says the clearance of goods at the border currently takes an average of 2 days. The authority says with improved clearance methods, it would only need a few hours to clear goods. It, however, says more will still have to be done to achieve that.
Another area is also to introduce a risk management system at Nimule and Juba International Airport to train our officers on those things. Also to support the National Revenue Authority Custom Division to accede to the World Customs Organization and become active members.
South Sudan's Revenue Authority says it wants fiscal transparency, accountability, and effective revenue collection. However, the challenge is that the tax body only collects revenue and doesn't control how it is used. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Ethiopia's parliament has passed a bill to allow members of the Ethiopian diaspora who have taken up nationalities in other countries to invest, buy shares and set up lending businesses in the country's state-dominated financial sector. The move is the latest step in a general push to liberalize the country's economy. The government has previously said it will privatize Ethio Telecom, the state-owned telecommunication monopoly. Since Ethiopia does not allow citizens to have dual nationalities, the latest round of reforms is seen as good news for the country's 5 million strong diaspora community, as well as Ethiopians with foreign nationalities living inside the country. Down south, Zimbabwe's government says it's ready to settle with global lenders, sell assets and make the difficult spending decisions needed for financial recovery. But with opposition protests against plunging living standards already taking place in Harare, it's in a race against time. Finance Minister Untitled Chapter has dismissed rapidly accelerating inflation as wage compression and warned the country will have to endure 4 more months of economic pain. Almost a year into the job, Nkube has reined in state spending and boosted tax revenue. But his introduction of a new currency in June, accompanied by a ban on the use of the US dollar, has seen the rapid erosion of spending power, with the Zimbabwe dollar trading at almost 10 to the greenback. Farai Makutu is following these developments for us. He joins us live from Harare for more. Farai, first off, the government says it's ready to settle long-standing debt arrears. How exactly is it planning to do that? Where is this money coming from?
Well, Peninah, the finance minister, Professor Untitled Chapter, has a very elegantly laid out plan that involves completing the staff-monitored program to which Zimbabwe is signed up with the IMF. And once that is completed at the end of this year, he says that he will then look to borrow about $1.9 billion from the G7, that is a group of 7 developed nations, use that $1.9 billion to pay off what Zimbabwe owes to the World Bank and the African Development Bank. He reckons that once he's done that, he'll be able to get relief of about $1 billion from those 2 institutions, which he will then credit or use to pay back to the G7. Now, he says those negotiations are underway. I think the fact that he's now talking about them, laying out these plans and making them public is an indication that he's confident that it will come through. So if these plans do pan out, that is where the funding will come from, Peninah.
And Farai, the minister also says the country will have to endure 4 more months of economic pain under the austerity measures, which were backed by the IMF. Are there any indicators so far that these measures are bearing fruit?
Well, Peninah, I think the indications that we are often told about, and certainly we've seen, are the facts that the government has been able to balance its books. In fact, it is running a surplus. We're told about 800 million Zimbabwe dollars in terms of budget surplus. We also know that the finance minister has been able to rein in government spending. The fiscal deficit has been narrowed, and we've also started to see government start to service its domestic debt. So those are some of the fiscal victories, if you want to call them that, or milestones or achievements that we've seen in terms of these austerity measures. There are also reforms on the monetary front that have been able to slow down the acceleration or, the parallel market rate, the black market rate for foreign currency. Those measures, liberalizing the currency markets, setting up this interbank market, have also brought some sanity to the currency market. So those are the key milestones and achievements that we've heard about. But as you say, 4 more months of pain is something that many Zimbabweans may not be wanting to hear at this point in time.
What about inflation, Farai? We know the release of those figures has been suspended for 6 months, but so far it's been pegged at 176%. Does the government have a viable plan of tackling that?
Well, Peninah, what we've seen so far, and certainly the intentions we've heard, the inflation, much of the inflation that we are experiencing here is being driven because of this parallel market rate for foreign currency. The shortages that we're experiencing are causing companies who can't access money through formal channels to go into the black market. And because the rates are high there, they then pass on, the cost at which they are buying this currency onto their customers. And that is what has driven inflation in the most part. So what government is hoping to do is by introducing these currency reforms that have tamed the currency markets, that have slowed down the parallel market, they are hoping that they'll start to see some benefits or some dividends coming from that. In addition, the government is also, because of these very strict regulations, these new austerity measures, has also limited its borrowing, limited its spending, and that has had an impact in terms of money creation. If it controls money creation and doesn't keep printing money as it did in the past, that will also be a way in which it can start to tame and slow down inflation. So those are the two main ways in which we see government trying to address this and to tackle it, but it will be very difficult. 175%, as you say, and year on year, month on month, we'll also expect that it will start to rise, but we'll wait to see what those next figures are in the coming month.
Indeed, Farai, and the finance minister talking about 4 more months of having to endure these austerity measures, the pain of it all. There was a protest organized today against these tough economic times in the country. Give us an update on that.
Well, Peninah, the main opposition MDC alliance had called for these protest marches. In fact, they were planning or are planning to have them not just in Harare but elsewhere across the country. The police had, banned that protest because it feared that it might degenerate into violence. The opposition filed an application with the High Court, an urgent application that was heard this morning, but it upheld that police ban. So the police then swiftly moved to disperse the protesters who had made their way into the CBD. A few hundred, opposition supporters and people had marched into the city to participate in this protest, but they were quickly dispersed. But I think the biggest, impact of the protest that we saw today is the fact that many people decided to stay away from their places of work, decided to stay at home for fear of the violence and more disturbances as we've seen in the past. The previous experiences that have happened here, in January as well as in August last year, many people decided to play it safe and to stay at home. So the CBD in Harare today was a virtual ghost town because no one was there. The few businesses that had initially opened at the beginning of the day had shut down by lunchtime. And so while the protest itself did not take off or wasn't successful, there was some disruption in terms of people staying away from business and business being brought to a standstill.
All right, Farai, thank you for that update. Farai Mokutuya live in Harare. Up next, we're looking at your corporate headlines. South Africa's Sasol plunged the most in more than 2 decades after the company delayed its financial results for a month to coincide with a report on what went wrong during construction of its near $13 billion Lake Charles chemical project in Louisiana. The company also disclosed it has run into yet another setback at the facility after the ethane cracker experienced a technical challenge that delayed startup for several days. Egypt's top cigarette maker, Eastern Tobacco, says it's raising prices of some of its cigarettes by 4.5% to 6%, citing higher labor and production costs. The retail price for its Mundial cigarettes will rise to about $1.05, up from $1. The retail price for Black Label cigarettes will rise to $1.40, up from $1.30. The company average acceleration program, replacing and modernizing base stations and digital services. Vodacom, majority owned by Britain's Vodafone, invested over $630 million last year. Vodacom has grown its South African rural network coverage significantly over the past 6 years, covering over 16 million people with 4G LTE services. Shares in True Worth slumped into a 9-year low on Friday morning after the fashion retailer reported a 74% slide in profits amid difficult trading environments in South Africa and the UK. The group shares slipped to 4.3% to $3.64 in early trade, the worst level since August 2010. In its results for the year ended June this year, released late on Thursday, True Worth said after-tax profits fell 74.1% to $45 million compared to $175 million in 2018. And that's a look at your corporate news. You're watching Global Business. Still ahead. The trial of ousted Sudanese leader Omar al Bashir set to take off in Khartoum. And high dependence on gas imports widens Tunisia's fiscal deficit.
The economy as we know it is about to change. Global Business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures. we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business. The corruption trial of Sudan's deposed leader Omar al Bashir is set to begin the same day that military rulers and protest leaders will sign a landmark transition accord that's meant to pave the way for civilian rule. Bashir was ousted and arrested following months of protests sparked by harsh effects of a collapsing economy. He was considered a severe and uncompromising ruler characterized by war crimes. CGTN's Alexandria Majala takes a look at the life of Omar Hassan al Bashir.
Born in 1944, Sudan's former president Omar al Bashir's life was characterized by war. He graduated from Sudan's military academy in 1966 and later fought in the 1973 October War between Israel and the Arab nations. He would later rise through the ranks to become a general in the Sudanese military. In June 1989, al Bashir came to power after toppling the democratically elected government of Prime Minister Sadiq al-Mahdi. This happened as the civil war between the North and South, with John Garang leading a secessionist war under the Sudan's People's Liberation Army, entered the 6th year. Al-Bashir's presidency was characterized by what international players termed as repression. His on and off association with hardline Islamic ideologist and politician Hassan el-Turabi saw Bashir at some point establish links with the Muslim Brotherhood. It is during this association that Saudi billionaire Osama bin Laden established an al-Qaeda base in Sudan in 1991. The August 7, 1998 bombing of American embassies in East Africa put Sudan in focus as the United States presented al-Bashir's regime as a sympathizer of terror networks. The Bill Clinton administration, immediately after the attacks, executed retaliatory airstrikes on major Sudanese installations. This was later followed by economic sanctions on Khartoum. In 2003, a major conflict broke out in the province of Darfur as non-Arab movements sought to secede from Sudan. Omar is alleged to have armed a local Arab militia called Janjaweed in his efforts to suppress the secessionist movements. The United Nations and the US tried in vain to persuade Bashir to allow a peacekeeping mission in Darfur. Horrific human rights violations put Bashir under yet another limelight. International human rights organizations called for investigations into what they termed as a genocide against black Sudanese residents of Darfur.
We have come here to confirm to you that we are committed to comprehensive peace in Darfur. Peace is strategic, essential, and the top issue on which we will all work together.
The International Criminal Court would later issue an arrest warrant against Bashir and his co-accused in 2008. Despite the controversies that plagued his tenure as president of Sudan, Bashir is credited with granting South Sudan independence in 2011. Al-Bashir's mediation efforts also saw Central African Republic's government and armed groups sign a peace deal that has stabilized the Great Lakes nation. Bashir's fall in April rode the crest of an uprising that was led by civilian populace over food shortages and escalating cost of living. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Let's discuss this further with Bassem Ali, an editor at Ahram Online and expert in North African affairs, is live for us in Cairo. Bassem, thank you for joining us. So Bashir's trial begins tomorrow. He's charged with corruption. And some observers say they expect this trial will be a sham. Do you agree with that?
So far, all the signs coming from Khartoum says the opposite. The army is open to discussions and deals with the civilian powers. They accepted having a deal and arranging a transitional council in which civilians are more represented than military personnel. And now Bashir is being taken to court. So based on what we have on the ground so far, that does not seem to be the case, especially that, as we've seen from media reports, the charges are really serious. They involved currency, they involved taking illegal gifts and other charges related to corruption. So on the spot or in the meantime, that doesn't seem to be the case. However, as things start to unfold, we will start to get more information, and the picture will become clearer about the future of Bashir's trial in Sudan.
Now, Bashir's critics have blamed him for the collapse of the country's economy. His supporters, however, have blamed a Western conspiracy designed to undermine Islamic rule in Sudan. What do you think are the factors that contributed to the meltdown of the country's economy?
There is no doubt that al Bashir's regime is responsible to a great extent for the economic crisis that Sudan has been passing through in the past years. Tense relations with the West, sanctions, conflict with either with South Sudan before independence, or with Darfur, or with the regions of Kordofan and the Blue Nile. All of these issues have made the economic progress of the country in question. It made it a very hard issue to be resolved. It's very hard to discuss economic development and progress amid a number of wars being in place at the same time. Even during the transitional period after Omar Bashir left in the past months, we've seen that the international community is still somehow reluctant to act economically or to cooperate with Sudan. And instead it has been the Emiratis and the Saudis who have been stepping in to save the situation with billions of billions of dollars in aid. So of course al Bashir is responsible for the crisis, but now al Bashir is gone, and I think it's time to open a new page. It's time to have a new chapter with Sudan, and that I think that requires more involvement from Europe, from the West, from Asia, from all parts of the world. That requires somehow an economic engagement with Sudan, because it seems that the situation is becoming more and more fertile for economic discussions.
What about the ICC trial? He enjoyed immunity as the head of state. Now that he's out of power, are we likely to see him facing trial at The Hague?
Concerning the international trial of Sudan, we've seen a statement coming from one of the generals in the military council saying that al Bashir will not be handed to international authorities for trial, and instead all trials will take place inside Sudan. I think this is a very positive sign in the meantime, especially that it shows or it reflects some sort of seriousness that the new authorities in Sudan is interested in having a real trial with Omar al Bashir. However, it requires a number of guarantees. We need to listen to more details about these issues, especially that everything will take place inside the country. What are the cases that he will be trialed on its basis? What are the charges? How the process will go on? So based on what we have so far, Bashir is not going anywhere. He's staying in Sudan. The trial will take place in Sudan, but I think everyone is interested in knowing more details about how the process will unfold in the coming days and weeks.
All right, Bassem Ali, thank you very much for your time. Now moving to Tunisia, the annual report of the Ministry of Energy has shed light on the main challenges facing energy independence. Experts say the cost of Tunisia's dependence on foreign imports is too high for a fragile economy. CGTN's Adned Shawashi has more.
The Tunisian National Oil Company has warned that the country's energy independence rate, which represents the ratio of available resources and primary energy compared to consumption, has decreased at an alarming rate from 95% in 2010 to 51% in 2017 and 48% in 2018.
The annual report is clear. Tunisia needs to review its energy strategy and to reduce its dependence, which increases fuel imports and has a negative impact and many consequences on the economy.
The Energy Commission at Parliament says the expanding energy deficit is explained by the decline in available primary energy resources by 4.6% on one hand and the increase in primary energy consumption by 1.4% on the other hand.
The share of the energy deficit in relation to the country's trade deficit went up from 5.8% in 2010 to 32.4% in 2018. This may affect the balance of payments and consequently the foreign exchange holdings and the value of the Tunisian currency.
The energy subsidy has continuously risen in the last decade. This subsidy multiplied by 5 in 2018 compared to 2010, saw its share in the total subsidy increase from 37% in 2010 to 55% in 2018, with a peak of 68% in 2013.
We recognize the energy subsidy, which benefits less than 20% of what is required, is made at the expense of more urgent subsidies like health and commodities or expenditure on regional development, public investment and employment.
According to the Office of the Prime Minister, the Tunisian energy plan aims to generate 30% of electricity from renewable energy in order to reduce the country's dependence on imported oil and gas. The recent report of the Tunisian National Oil Company concluded that the conventional measures adopted by the state, which consist of successive increases in prices of fuel and electricity to mitigate the deficit, have not only proved ineffective, but were also sources of social unrest and strikes. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed into law a controversial debt relief bill which contains provisions strongly opposed by the banking industry and the opposition, the DA party. The National Credit Amendment Bill, which was approved earlier this week, provides for the cancelling of debt for heavily indebted consumers who earn a gross monthly income of no more than $500 and have unsecured debt above $3,000. The banking industry opposed the proposals on the grounds that they would result in a restriction of credit to the low-income section of the market and that the extinguishing of debt represents an unconstitutional deprivation of property. Meanwhile, South Africa's ABSA, in partnership with Societe Generale, recently announced a commercial agreement that offers a combined wholesale banking offer to serve their clients in their financial needs. This agreement includes a combined offering dedicated to Chinese companies operating in Africa, allowing them to benefit from an expanded geographical reach with complementary banking products and services. CGTN's Angelo Coppola sat down with the ABSA head of client cover to discuss this.
So how will this joint offering between yourselves and SocGen actually benefit and increase trade between China and Africa?
Both our banks have had a very extensive footprint. In fact, in the 12 countries that we are present in, we are systemically important to those economies. We've been there for more or less 100 years in most of those countries. So understanding the local needs, the local banking requirements, but more importantly, what do Africans really want and need is what we can offer the Chinese market.
In terms of your interaction with Chinese business people, what's the most common issue that's raised by those business people when they're considering investing in Africa?
So I think that the common issues raised is, do we understand the Chinese client? The second common issue that's raised is, do we understand the African market? Do we have a vested interest in those markets? And how can we help them integrate into those local markets and offer them the services that's truly required to take a business forward and to grow their businesses within the African markets. In fact, we recently acquired all of Huawei's businesses in about 9 countries, providing all the local banking and service needs that Huawei requires in Africa.
In terms of impacts, what kind of impact has there been with this joint offering that is in place right now in terms of generating business opportunities?
So I think definitely impacts from a sector perspective. So whilst we do very good corporate banking in our local markets, we also have very strong sector expertise based on the continent. For example, mining, oil and gas, power, utilities, infrastructure, telecoms, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, to name a few. So this deep sector insight is something that we've been doing a lot of thought leadership on jointly with SocGen, and it's something that's been highly welcomed by the Chinese clients.
China's investment in Nigeria's oil and gas industry has hit the $16 billion mark. The investments have largely been made through China National Offshore Oil Corporation, which began its operations in the country in 2005. CNOOC currently produces 800,000 barrels per day worldwide, as it targets to hit around 1.2 million barrels per day. The Chinese firm says Nigeria is one of places it's looking at to actualize that goal. Meanwhile, Nigerian state oil firm NNPC has called for strategic partnership with China for new investments. This is said to be essential for the West African economy as it looks to actualize its 3 million barrels per day oil production target by 2023. Still in Nigeria, coffee farmers in the north say more needs to be done to exploit the region so it can become a major coffee producer to rival top African exporters. Nigeria currently exports about 2,400 metric tons of coffee per year, but it lags far behind countries like Ethiopia and Uganda. CGTN Samson Omale reports.
Vom in Nigeria's Plateau State. It's home to several dormant volcanic mountains. The landscape and its weather conditions make it perfect for growing the unique Blue Mountain Arabica coffee.
This is the south, and this is Vom. Why the Arabica coffee grew up very fine? 1, the soil richness. 2, the highest altitude. Then thirdly, the weather. In fact, from America, London, India, even China, Japan, Germany, all they have come here.
But despite the potential, there are currently barriers in the way.
I'm a farmer. I farm vegetables and crops like coffee. I process coffee, but I had to stop processing coffee.
He regularly educates local coffee farmers on best practices to improve their yield.
In Kim's Coffee, what we do basically is just we're consulting, we're farmers, we're at the same time coffee added value. And what we do in the consulting firm, what we do is we work with the farmers and teaching them the simple practice, the pruning, the stunting, the sterilization, the storage, so that we have very good production, good quality coffee, and have a very good sustainable project at the end of the day.
Coffee is the world's second most traded global commodity after oil. Africa accounts for about 12% of global supply.
Coffee farmers like Christopher and coffee processors like David could boost local production of coffee with improvement in infrastructure and access to credit.
These farmers have identified the absence of a value chain and government policy on coffee and tea production as one of the major setbacks for farmers getting their products ready for export.
I would like the government to come in and help us local processors and farmers of coffee to source this market outside of the state, and also the logistics problems involved in transporting these products outside of the state are challenges that we want the government to come in and meet the association for them to lend a helping hand.
I knew more than 50 people whom they have destroyed the coffee farms because, 1, insecurity and financial problem.
The Plateau Agricultural Development Program is a government agency responsible for interfacing with coffee producers. It claims much is being done to provide farmers with services to improve yield.
The government is paying our salary to enable us render services to the farmers and even allowances to go to the field and render the extension services on coffee and other crops. In the past, the government also gave us money to multiply coffee seedlings, and we did that, and we launched the promotion of coffee production by supplying them the seedlings free of charge.
And so, if coffee production soars here, it could complement oil as a major foreign exchange earner and allow producers like Christopher and David to tread a path towards greater success. Samson Omale, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business. Coming up after the break. Tension over Strait of Hormuz destabilizes crude prices and insurance premiums. And first Huawei 5G phones go on sale.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Recapping some big stories of the day, the Democratic Republic of Congo has seen 2 new Ebola cases confirmed in the country's South Kivu province. This opens a new Ebola front more than 700 kilometers south of North Kivu, where the outbreak was first detected slightly over a year ago. South Kivu borders Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda and Tanzania to the east. According to South Kivu's administration, the new infections were reported in Luindi district and Mwenga region. All parties are set for the Sudanese constitutional declaration on Saturday. Sudan's Transitional Military Council and the Opposition Freedom and Change Alliance are scheduled to sign the Political and Constitutional Sovereignty Council, the Council of Ministers and the Transitional Legislative Council. And several seamen, including 3 Russians, have been abducted from 2 ships off the coast of Cameroon. Both vessels were attacked within hours of each other while they were anchored off the port of Douala. A Cameroonian Navy source says the kidnappers are possibly Nigerian pirates, adding that search and rescue efforts are underway. And that's a wrap of some of the day's top stories. It's approaching 3 months since the first tanker attack rocked trade in the Gulf's crucial oil transit route. Since the Strait of Hormuz is described as the most important oil choke point and almost a third of the crude oil carried by tankers has to pass through here, the attacks have already destabilized crude prices and insurance premiums. CGTN's Jacob Greaves has more from Dubai.
The UK has now pledged to join America in policing the Strait of Hormuz. It comes as waters in the Gulf have become synonymous with scenes like this. 2 separate attacks on tankers in the region in recent months. The US claims Tehran is involved. Iran still denies responsibility. But whoever's to blame, companies looking to use the crucial oil transit route are faced with increasing risk.
Insurance premiums has definitely been the huge factor to impact the maritime sector as of now because of the various incidents. And following the June incident where the 2 tankers were attacked in the Gulf of Oman, the premiums shot up by almost 10% overnight just following the incident. And after the recent events, including the Stena Impero, where the maritime security has been enhanced and the perceived threat has enhanced, the quotes for, say, VLCC coming into the region has been in the range of about $100,000 for a 7-day transit in the Gulf.
But in waterways linking Middle East oil producers with international buyers, there's more at stake.
As a Gulf oil exporter, the UAE is exposed to any disruptions to freedom of navigation in the region, but it could be impacted in other ways as well. In Fujairah, it has one of the world's top bunkering hubs. Protracted heightened tensions here risk shippers turn to other refueling ports.
Providing ship fuel for passing tankers is big business for Fujairah, but it was just off its coast that back in May this happened. The first incident in the region involving 4 tankers. Analysts point to a resulting dent in business.
The biggest impact really has been on the demand for bunkers down in Fujairah. It saw a sizable drop off immediately after the attacks, and it's picked up a little bit since then. Probably down to the fact that geographically Fujairah is the best placed bunkering hub in the region, which is why it was so popular there with owners. But also the prices have discounted quite heavily just to attract some more business in.
Those fuel discounts on offer have been sizable. Refinitiv data suggests at times as much as $45 per metric tonne cheaper than in rival Singapore.
Unless there is some reassurance that the Fujairah government or whoever the powers that may be to steady things down in Fujairah at the moment, then I think over the course of time, I think owners will reposition. They won't regard Fujairah as being a bunkering hub as secure as it used to be, and it will have an adverse effect on the region in general.
Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz if it can't trade oil in line with a nuclear pact reached in 2015. The US and Saudi Arabian energy ministers expressed their concern at any threat to freedom of navigation. Images like this could cast a shadow over oil markets for some time. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
Chinese telecommunication giant Huawei has sold some of its first commercial 5G handsets, the Mate 20X 5G, at its official store in central Beijing. A Huawei salesperson said that the store's stock of 22 Mates was gone within 30 minutes. That's out of Huawei's first batch of 1,000 handsets priced at about $880 US. Only some parts of China's largest cities, including Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Shenzhen, currently have 5G coverage. Meanwhile, Huawei remains confident that Britain will support the company in the next steps of the country's 5G mobile internet network. No final decisions have been made, but Huawei's president of Global Government Affairs, Victor Yang, said that he believes the company can maintain positive dialogue with the British government and a new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson.
I still believe the UK government will make the right decision based on the facts and evidence. We haven't talked to the new government. The UK government always very open to the private sector, to the industry. So we had the very good communication with the previous government. We believe we will have the very good conversation with the new government.
To Hong Kong now, where revised government data showed on Friday that the city's economy shrunk 0.4% in the April to June period from the previous quarter. That's slightly worse than the previous estimate. On a yearly basis, the economy expanded 0.5% in the second quarter, but it was the slowest pace since the 2008 global recession. The result came as continued protests scare off tourists and bite into retail sales. Meanwhile, a stimulus package is on the way to boost the local economy, but will it help? CGTN's Guyen Fei finds out.
Gripped by violence and protests, Hong Kong's economic growth falls to its lowest level in a decade. A stimulus package of 19 billion Hong Kong dollars, about 2.4 billion US dollars, will be injected into the Hong Kong economy. It's comprised of a series of relief measures aimed at boosting growth.
We have seen a rather sharp slowdown of our economy in recent months. We expect that the situation will get worse in the coming months.
The city government announced these stimulus measures after Hong Kong's economic growth forecast in 2019 fell to a new low, 0 to 1%.
People might ask whether these measures are in response to political pressure as a result of the extradition bill incident. I can tell you that this is very clear that these two things are not related at all. These measures are planned as a result of our assessment of the economic situation.
Hong Kong's economy is at stake. Some critics say the government stimulus package aims to ease the social unrest by giving out sweeteners and waivers. But if the city's economy continues to slide, 2019 may turn in a negative growth rate for the year.
Well, I think the timing is absolutely correct. We're under a lot of pressure at this point in terms of our economic development at this point. If you look at the violent activities over the last 2 months that we've seen in Hong Kong, is adding to that pressure.
While some say the package is only aimed at short-term interests, Chow disagrees.
No doubt it's certain stimulus is aimed at the short term. If investors' confidence are back, and if general public's confidence in terms of spending and consumption is back, it will lead to long-term benefit.
Chow calls for an end to the violence to prevent Hong Kong from sinking into a recession.
So I think you see even potentially worse statistics in the next quarter, and it's critical that we stop and control all of the violent activities at this point.
He hopes Hong Kong returns to its normal path of law and order as soon as possible. Gu Winfei, CGTN, Hong Kong.
Foreign exchange has been set up in Cyprus, where tax incentives have lured dozens of the world's top companies to set up shop. But Cyprus was in an economic meltdown just a handful of years ago. So why didn't investors and companies shy away, and how do companies foresee weathering Brexit? CGTN's Stephanie Freed has this report from Limassol, Cyprus.
Cyprus is synonymous with a laid-back lifestyle. Sun, beach, sand, vacation. But a few years ago, things weren't so relaxed. Financial crisis fueled by bank lending necessitated a bailout and tough austerity measures. Ironically, at the same time, Forex companies doing business in Cyprus were thriving. Why would global investment firms set up shop in a country downgraded to junk status?
Because we have also the FCA regulation that is based in UK, this gives strengthen even more the trust for clients, investors.
Regulations protecting investors and significant tax breaks. 12.5% corporate tax versus the UK's 19% make Cyprus an attractive incorporation address. There are about 100 international Forex companies operating out of Cyprus today, but the boom is starting to bust. New EU regulations aimed at standardizing investments are pushing companies toward less regulated countries.
The big ones are staying, but they're only making maybe a third of the money they were making before.
And there is Brexit to consider.
We have 2 licenses and 2 legal entities in the UK and here in Cyprus. We're well prepared for any case of any scenario of Brexit.
Standard & Poor ranks Cyprus as one of the top 4 economies vulnerable to Brexit trade effects. Stephanie Freed, CGTN, Limassol, Cyprus.
Let's look at the commodities market. Crude oil prices rose more than 2% today, recovering from 2 days of declines after data showing a rise in U.S. retail sales helped to ease concerns about a recession in the world's biggest economy. Gold, however, fell 1%, weighed down by gains in the equity markets and the dollar. Still ahead in global business. A South African couple hopes to create an African comic universe.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Let's turn our attention to Cuba now, where young entrepreneurs are taking advantage of internet connectivity to develop the country's own ride-sharing app to facilitate people's lives. CGTN's Luis Chirino has more from Havana.
Internet connectivity has come slowly to Cuba, but recent years have seen significant growth in Wi-Fi hotspots, cyber cafes, and home DSL connections. And with the launch of mobile data service last December, enterprising young Cubans saw further opportunity. A university teacher, a designer, and an IT programmer came together to create a ride-sharing app adapted to Cuban conditions. Claudia Cuevas is one of the developers of the Cuban mobile app Sube, or Get In English.
With this app, we try to reproduce the everyday dynamics when calling a taxi, negotiating the price for the tip. This is what we wanted to do with Sube.
Claudia says it didn't take long for the service to catch on.
For us, the opening of mobile data services was all we needed to make the app operative and available to everyone. People began to download it. In all, over 5,000 passengers and more than 300 cab drivers have joined in.
This is an app with a social impact. At the end of the day, our objective is to help the local transportation of people.
Only drivers operating with a private worker's license can join Sube, and all drivers must register their cars. Havana is an overpopulated city with over 2 million inhabitants. For most people here, traveling around town, particularly in rush hour, is quite an issue. The new app helps ease everyday tensions, says this young woman.
Previously, I had to go out on the street. Now I can spot a cab from home or any other place. Also pick the car and negotiate the trip price. This app Sube is safe and efficient, so I'll keep using it.
To hail a ride, you just need a cell phone with the Sube app, and it finds nearby drivers with either a modern car or an old American classic like this one.
This service means more work and more money. I can be available to anyone on the map, and this increases my revenues while I offer a good service to the people.
The new app benefits both taxi drivers and passengers, and even foreign visitors can download the app and access the service. It's an app that's quickly found a following in this Cuban community, proving it can make a difference in people's life. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
We've all been wowed by superheroes, enchanted by princesses, and arced by villains which have come out of a Marvel, DC, or a Walt Disney studio. It's a $1 billion market that African illustrators have struggled to break into. But the Alili family is hoping to create their own comic universe which can someday be equal to the giants of the industry. CGTN's Julie Sher reports.
Venimax Comics is the vision of Jessica Alili and her husband. Their tough journey to pioneer an African comic book empire started 6 years ago.
I wanted to start, this business for my children because
I see that that's their naturally gifted talent. When we came out with Vanimax Comics, we did not have the finances. We even tried as much as going to the Ministry of Arts and Culture, but then somehow, as things always go here in Africa, it didn't work out.
But this talented family of illustrators weren't discouraged. Their thoughts translate like poetry onto paper, and they're determined to bring to life African stories that have been buried by history.
My character, Nyasha Mawari. And yeah, I think a lot of people, when I show my friends or just people in general, they say, yeah, she looks a lot like Wonder Woman. And to be honest, I was inspired by, Wonder Woman. But I wanted to bring an African approach to it. These were warrior queens who were fighting for their countries. And so that was what I played into character with her, was to bring that history into a fictional character.
So Super South Africa stands for, he fights for liberty. That's his thing. So he doesn't care where you're from or what color of skin you are. If you're being oppressed, he will stand for you. I was actually inspired by both Superman and Captain America when creating him.
The Alelis have big plans to create a Vanimax universe to play a part in the billion-dollar global industry. The first step is an online black and white series called BW.
We want to first introduce the world to our characters and the world to the Vanimax Comics brand. We really want Vanimax to be a core African comic brand that every kid in Africa should have a Vanimax comic toy or comic book or a t-shirt. So that's the end game, basically, to be global, to be as big as Marvel and DC.
Ambitious, some might say, but where else does an alternative universe start from, if not from a dream? Judy Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And looking at the currency, South Africa's rand firmed today, adding to the previous session's gains as hopes of further stimulus in China help developing world currencies hold their ground against the dollar. The rand has fallen more than 6% since the beginning of August, pressured by the rising likelihood of a credit ratings downgrade by Moody's linked to a massive additional bailout for state power firm Eskom and signs of slower global growth. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business. We invite your feedback, send it to the contacts on the screen, and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.